Let's get into it. Soul Not For Sale podcast. I got Joe Rogan talking with a guy who used to be a far left Marxist, family was all communist, and he ended up switching to conservative. And of course, when you do something like that, you get branded as far right. So Joe Rogan's going to be talking to him about what made him switch. Then we're going to go a little deeper into what made him switch, because there was a documentary that he made. I'm going to show you a couple of clips from that. It's called America Lost. So I'm going to show you 3 clips from that, where he goes to the poorest states in the United States of America and how that opened his eyes to what these leftist ideologies and policies actually bring about in a community. Then he talks with Jordan Peterson. I'm going to show you some clips from that conversation because they delve deeper into what awakened him there. Then we're going to delve into the work that he's done alongside Governor DeSantis, because he's actually helped rid Florida of DEI, which is amazing to hear. Out of schools, really has done some great work there. Then we're going to delve into what makes the left so toxic. The far left, of course. So we're going to be delving into who Saul Alinsky is, Saul Alinsky, sorry, and his book, Rules for Radicals. I'm going to take you through who he is and some of the rules that are in this book. When you hear these rules, I swear you're going to go boonk. It's going to click exactly what's going on today. Today's administration, today's Democratic Party. Trust me, this is their handbook, Rules for Radicals. Trust me on this. Then I'm going to show you some examples of Saul at work, not he himself because he has passed away, but through the administration. And then I'm going to show you something that actually this guest touches on, which is a book called White Rule Rage, where they also take a page out of Rules for Radicals and they demonize people who are white from rural areas. Come with me on a quick ride. We got 14 clips. Let's get into it. Don't forget about IamCoachColin.com. We got Soul Not For Sale stuff, whole bunch of stuff, different variations, new design, cancel Hollywood, new design, stop worshiping celebrities. Of course, Public Enemy #1. There's all sorts of stuff. The discount code is IamCoachColin, all capital letters, all one word, 1 L in the name Colin. Let's get into this first clip. Joe Rogan, ladies and gentlemen. Bang, let's go.
Society where you have a portion of people who are the, getting stoned and banging the bongos. Okay, fine. The problem is, though, that when it becomes out of proportion, when that ideology, that kind of elimination of prohibition or limits or constraints becomes the dominant policymaking regime. That works when it's a counterculture.
Right.
The kind of left wing, and look, I come from the left. I was a radical leftist. I was a Gramscian Marxist. So I know that world.
What made
intimately.
you take a turn?
I wanted to get into politics. My political formation was from my father's side. Italian relatives, they were all unreconstructed Gramscian communists. And so that was like my political upbringing. I remember going to visit my aunts and uncles and seeing like the books on their shelf. And it's like, oh, they have this beautiful collection of bound books. And I talked to my aunt and I say, oh, what is this? Zia, what is this book? And it's like, oh, this is the collected works of Lenin.
Wow.
Like not ironically, not as a historical thing, but as this is the father of our revolution. And so that was my political formation. I went to get my undergraduate degree at Georgetown with the intention of being involved in left-wing politics. The first thing that really kind of disillusioned me was finding out that left-wing politics in the United States is not for the common man. It's not to uplift the downtrodden. It's about maintaining their own status and prestige with the institutions. It's like a McKinsey consultant kind of worldview with the trappings of the left. It's the Harvard student who's wearing the Palestinian keffiyeh who then goes on to become an investment banker. And it's like, to me, it was so phony. It was a profoundly phony and empty political movement run by the sons and daughters of American elites for their own benefit. The second thing that really changed me, I spent 5 years, first I traveled around the world making documentaries. I saw how Marxist and communist governments actually work out in practice. Not great. And then I made a film for PBS, of all places, looking at 3 of America's poorest cities. And by then kind of center-left views, which was, the Great Society, public welfare programs, trying to help people. When you actually see how those programs manifest in the south side of Memphis, south side of Youngstown, south side of Stockton, California, the poorest places in the country, you realize that many of those ideals that are presented to you as care, compassion, concern, equality, reparations for our racial past, are at best cynical, and at worst deeply destructive to the people that they're supposed to help. And so I spent so much time getting to know people and thinking about people's lives and then how politics affects them. And you realize that the project of the left is a human disaster. Even if, rationally speaking, it should produce something that is good. And then the final change was in the run-up and then after 2020. I mean, 2020 radicalized me because you realize how profound this cultural capture is. And you realize that the consequences are no longer abstract. They're no longer just destroying, poor neighborhoods in South Memphis, let's say, that are totally run by the state. But actually, it's now proliferated to the middle classes, the upper classes. This is something that wants total domination. And so I got canceled out of my documentary career. Once I became known as a conservative, I lost funding, I lost relationships, I lost broadcast, distribution. And then it's like I'm out, kind of launched into the wilderness. Like, all right, well, that career is done. What do I do next? And then say, all right, well, let's get into politics. Let's use some of the skills that I've developed as a filmmaker. I'm not a traditional conservative. Like, I'm not a college Republican. I don't own a bow tie.
But I have a bow tie?
I think you have to have a bow tie.
But if you're a gay guy, you can have a bow tie and be super left.
That's true. There's nuance to it. But what I realize is that the conservative principles are sometimes expressed awkwardly, are sometimes articulated poorly, but there's some deep truths that need to be resurrected and recovered for us to be successful again. And so I threw in my lot with people that I would never have imagined being friends and allies and colleagues with, growing up. It's like, this huge shift politically. And I think it's been helpful because if you know how your political opponents think, you have a huge advantage. And the left, kind of elite, kind of academic leftists in the United States have no idea what conservatives think. They have zero curiosity about it. And so that affords us a kind of advantage because they don't know how we think, how we operate, what our principles are. They just assume the worst. And so I kind of wake up every day thinking about the people that are around me and saying, in an odd way, you're fighting for people that are actually voiceless. The left is the dominant voice of the country, of all of our institutions, of all of our tech companies. The voice that really is voiceless are the people who are supposedly the oppressors. You have this book that just came out, White Rural Rage. Bullshit. Rural people in the United States are not angry enough, frankly. And so I just try to think in those terms always. And I've taken over some of the tactics of the left, some of the kind of maneuvers and some of my activist work, which I think has been helpful. But I just have this visceral, this visceral anger at people who have truly inherited positions of power and prestige. They give all this rhetoric about helping the oppressed, the underprivileged, the whatever is the kind of term of the day, but they're actually playing a cynical game to maintain their own status. I find that a betrayal of true left principles, and I don't think that I would be where I am today, had I not seen that betrayal up close and personal, and really, want to fight. I want to destroy that. I want to take all of those people who are selling a bill of goods to the people who are struggling in this country under these principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's just about having a tenured position, having a feather-bedded job, being able to do the activist work on the public dollar, not creating anything of value, not helping anyone but themselves. I think it's such a betrayal of the principles of the left, but really the principles of the country.
And I think the way you're explaining it, particularly in the desire to have a richness of culture and not have rigid rules, and to have the openness to have basically anybody just be who you are, but recognize that being captured by this ideology that supposedly supports you, it's doing it for its own means. It's doing it for a very specific purpose, and it's not doing it to support you. It's using these ideas and principles as camouflage to sneak in through your defenses. And it's dangerous, and it's creepy, and it's weird how effective it is. And that's why I'm really happy that you're out there, and I'm really happy that you can lay it down so articulately and express, especially coming from your background of being a guy who grew up that way, grew up leftist, to be able to express it. I think you have a very unique position in that regard, so I'm happy that you're out there.
Appreciate that. Yeah, and likewise, I mean, what I think is so special about what you do is that you're talking about culture and politics, society, business, for people who aren't in that bubble. Like, I operate in a political bubble every day.
Right.
But what you've built, and I think it's a testament to the possibilities of the internet. You don't have to be a ABC, NBC, CBS, talking head. You don't have to have the massive studio lights and the 8 layers of makeup. You're doing something that's real, and people have really responded to that. And I think that it's a reflection of something that we need more of. We have an artificial culture that is trying to take over.
Yeah, but propped up by corporations.
Exactly.
And the people that are talking about these things aren't even necessarily interested in these things. And that also resonates with the people that listen and watch. Like, I don't have people on that I don't want to talk to. I just have people on that I'm only interested in talking to. And if you can do that and you're actually interested, that's contagious. And these principles that we're talking about and this thing that the way you're laying it out, it's important for people even that consider themselves leftists to just consider what you're saying, because it's for you too. It's for everybody that we can't let this happen. It's for all ideas. It's for gay people, straight people, trans people, white people, black people, Asians. It's for everybody. The reason the founding fathers of this country set all these checks and balances in place is because they didn't want anyone to get total, complete control over the people. And that's what's happening right now. And if you don't wake up to it and you think it's okay because your side is winning, you're actually anti-American.
Well said. Very well said by Joe at the end. But surprising that this guy comes from a family that is like communist, basically. Very, very interesting, and that he took the switch. But it becomes more apparent why it happened as I start showing you these clips, because the places that he went to, and he mentioned it in the clip, the places that he went to and the people that he met and spoke with, he saw it right in front of their eyes. When you hear AOC saying that people are looting because they're looting Gucci stores because they need bread, when you hear her say that, you're like, oh, this is like, what are you talking about? But it's like, she doesn't go to those places. She doesn't see the looting. She's not in the store when it happens and the kick in the windows and a bunch of people just start dragging stuff and knock somebody over, knock her over. She doesn't see any of that. If she did day after day, she'd probably be like, oh, we need a little bit of law and order. Like, let's just hand these people the bread because this is crazy. They flipped the Walgreens upside down yesterday and it was wild and I got stomped on. Like, if she actually encountered it, it'd be different. And that's the difference between her and Chris. Chris actually encountered it. He actually faced it head on. And it's a very interesting documentary. Again, it's called America Lost. I'll show you a few clips from it. Let's get into this first clip. This first clip, he's actually in, I believe this is Youngstown. Okay, so let's get into this.
Yeah,
over there.
Just
Yeah,
laid off
they're
300.
laying off a shitload of people, man.
So Youngstown has been shrinking. You think it's going to shrink a lot more?
Yeah.
We've had a great displacement in our culture through this deindustrialization, through this transformation. But displacement does not mean a permanent situation. Displacement means you're hunting, you're searching for something. We're trying to deal with this great displacement and find this new whatever it's going to be.
On that wall, there's a public rubber bumper sticker. That's the only piece of memorabilia.
Well, look at this. There's your employee pass. You had to check a box if you wanted to go to the hospital.
Department, general office, or leave plan.
Had to be signed by your boss. So this is this piece of paperwork where one of journalism's great promises is to show you cause and effect. Why did this happen? And so at some point you say, well, if you do this, you get this. Just as in the 50s, Life magazine showed these great prosperous, the steel mill belching and the man picking up his new car and the woman with her new Frigidaire. Well, the modern equivalent of that essay is this closes. Now there's a line for free government cheese. Now there's people with empty refrigerators, kids who aren't learning in school. The prosperity started with this place when it was booming, and the downhill slide began when they closed.
Walking through ruins like this, I think about all the lives that were lived here. And every time I get emotional, every time I think about the people who didn't make it. Some people committed suicide. Some people ended up mentally ill. If I were here alone, I'd probably spend the rest of the evening walking through these ruins, just thinking about them.
In many ways, Youngstown is a symbol of what's to come. We've had economic changes before, but this is the first time our social institutions have collapsed as well. At heart, the crisis in America's forgotten cities is a crisis of meaning. All of the old structures that once provided a solid foundation, faith, family, work, and community, have slowly fallen apart. The real problem is not just economic, but deeply personal, human, even spiritual.
So that's just one clip. That was just him at Youngstown. I'm going to bring you another one, but it's just, it's very interesting, also very inspiring, as I do want to do some work like this myself, but it's very interesting to see. It's completely different when you actually go to the places. Like, you know, there's poor places all around, right? Like, I grew up poor, and but there's levels to poor, and what those people are going through in Youngstown at the time. Now, he did this in 2019. It was the poorest of the poor that the United States had to offer. It was the poorest place in the United States. That's, based on, whoever did the polls, they could be inaccurate, And nowadays it's actually Philadelphia that is considered the poorest. Probably Kensington, I would think, because that's where like the fentanyl epidemic is just like running rampant. But yeah, just interesting to see that this is the kind of stuff that could wake up somebody who is heavily left-leaning. And it's funny because I say that, but as I say that, I realize most people who are right-leaning, who have the values that they're talking about, the values that dissolved in this area, the faith and family, community, and all that stuff, they don't have to see stuff like this in order to have the values that they have. They just have the things that dissolved, that area didn't have, that Youngstown didn't have. You know what I mean? It's interesting. And, I don't want to point a finger because I don't know what happened in that place. But when I look at the left today, they are trying to dissolve those things. They are trying to dissolve faith. They are trying to dissolve family. The nuclear family is something that's very frowned upon right now in the far left. Faith is something that's just silly, right? You get branded as a Christian nationalist. And when they say Christian nationalist, they just mean Christian. That's it. That's all it is. They're trying to put a little spin on it so it doesn't sound that good, but it's just Christian. And they have an issue with that. It's weird. It's weird. The things that make a community strong, they have an issue with. But why would they want to make communities weak? But anyway, let's keep going. This is the next clip. Right now, I believe he's in Memphis. Let's go.
For a lot of people here in Memphis, man, it's an economic challenge because it's so hard to survive. One thing about here in the city of Memphis, if you're poor, you're poor. If you have it, then more than likely you have more than enough. It's really just survival of the fittest, man. It's survival of the fittest.
It's in these broken places where I can see how far these communities have fallen. Since the 1950s, cities like Memphis have lost more than half of their social capital. All of the old churches and civic associations that once shaped young men have broken apart. In the 38126 zip code of South Memphis, 93% of all family households are headed by a single mother. 78% of all families are on public assistance, and only 20% of all working-age men are employed full-time throughout the year. Out of nearly 6,000 total residents, there are only 10 nuclear families. Over the past 50 years, we've tried to solve these problems through public policy. The federal government currently spends more than $3 billion a year on anti-poverty programs in Memphis, but nothing works. In Shelby County Jail, I met hundreds of men who've been through an endless gauntlet of failed schools, failed prisons, and failed social programs. It's a tragedy for these men, but it's the women who carry the real burden. For every father in prison, there's a mother left to raise a family on her own. It's hard to see how they can create a better life for their kids.
Man, very impactful stuff. Very impactful stuff. And he, honestly, this, I'm only showing you little bits of it, but the documentary he made is an hour and 15 minutes, 22 seconds. If you're looking for the timestamps of this documentary where you're seeing Youngstown, that would be at 16 minutes. The last one I just showed you is at 33 minutes. So you can actually check that out if you wanna find it. But yeah, crazy stuff. You know, just seeing, you know, the guy saying if you're poor, you're poor. You know, that is how it feels when you're poor, definitely. Because I live below wherever I live definitely way below the poverty line for like 32 years, pretty much my whole life up until a little while ago, until I started working in film and television and started doing stuff and acquired skills that I needed. But before that, it was just barely able to stay alive. You know, it was just working any jobs I could. I was definitely one of those statistics, just, you know, only working, you know, maybe for me, it was like maybe 50% of the year I was working. And maybe I was too lazy, or I got fired, or whatever it was, or I stopped showing up, whatever it was. It's rough. And then sometimes you go months without being able to work. But again, there's levels to this poverty thing. And they're just levels below anything that I saw. I was in a cushy neighborhood compared to what you're seeing in this documentary. And then it goes back to the episode that I made yesterday about the gentleman who committed murder that was on Joe Rogan's show, Sheldon Johnson, talking about how so many of his relatives, his father, his son, his father's father, blah, 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 all in jail. And it's just like, man, this is why I have that hard stance. Because if you don't correct things, the nuclear family, and then the stat they said about the nuclear family is crazy. But if you don't correct yourself and get yourself in order, it's this, because the second you do, especially if you're a father, there is a woman that is going to potentially be taken care of, and there's a child that's going to be taken care of, and that's the nuclear family. And then that is considered like a building block in your community. And if you can just have tons of those building blocks, well, that's strong. That's a strong wall. That becomes a house. That becomes a community. Like, that's what you need. But the second you start minusing these fathers, and there's no jobs and there's no money, everything just crumbles. And that's exactly what you're seeing in the clips. It's all just crumbling. Cultural capture, total domination. Those are the things that Chris brought up as he was describing what he was seeing in the left. And let me tell you something. When you see a community like that, they are easily captured, and they are easily dominated. It is so easy, because when you're in that position that you see those people in, the state's going to take care of you. But what's also going to happen is they're going to dictate what you get. They're going to dictate how far you can rise up, as long as you let them take care of you and you don't rise up. Now, let's go on to the next clip. In this clip, he is in California, Stockton, I believe. Let's get to it.
Stockton is a tale of two cities, a tale of the haves and the have-nots. All you have to do is take a drive pretty much any direction, any freeway undercrossing, and you'll find what we like to call a tent city, where you have dozens, sometimes hundreds of people sleeping in tents. And I haven't seen really a great effort in the last 30 years to try to bridge that gap. This particular area right here, we have the Amtrak train station, and downtown Stockton, just right off of there, that area just to our north. And so this particular area right here is kind of the forgotten part of town. There was a lot of businesses at one time, but as you can see, it's pretty much a wasteland. There's been businesses that was once standing here either burnt down or was destroyed, and so you probably have several hundred people down here at any given time. You guys speak English? Hey, come on out real quick. I just talk to you. Nobody's in trouble, so just kick back. What's your name?
Juliana.
Juliana. Mm-hmm. Have you ever had problems with law enforcement in the past? No.
No.
Good girl?
Yes.
Yeah. When's the last time you used drugs?
Not even that long ago.
What's not long?
Right there.
Oh, right. Oh, is that where you get high at?
Yeah.
What do you usually use when you?
Scissors.
Scissors?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. What kind of drug is it? Like meth or what is that?
Meth.
It is?
Yeah.
What other drugs?
Nothing else.
Have you ever been to...
I feel like there's a sickness. It's like a plague almost of despair. It's a lack of hope, a lack of faith, a lack of trust among the community. And through the years and through the decades, the value of one's life here in this town has been devalued greatly. And I've seen that.
I have 5 friends get shot down by Stockton PD and the sheriff's department.
So right here is a spot where this murder took place. You can see the memorial. You see memorials like this on a lot of street corners here downtown. It's pretty sad right here. I actually, the very next street over is where I was born at. I had stayed in this neighborhood. I could have been me right there.
In many ways, Stockton is a city of the future. 50 years ago, it was an all-American city that welcomed poor people from all over the world and gave them a path into the middle class. But that great California dream has now disappeared. Today, Stockton is a post-industrial city. Many of the agricultural and light manufacturing jobs have been mechanized and chased away. It's a post-racial city, a quarter white, a quarter black, a quarter Latino, and a quarter Asian. And it's a post-familial city. In some Section 8 housing complexes, 100% of all children are born to single mothers.
Oh, man. Again, if you wanted a timestamp on when he hit Stockton, that's at 46 minutes. And that, again, it's called America Lost. Great documentary. And just showing some really hard to look at things that are going on in a lot of, I won't say left-leaning states because, Memphis, Tennessee. But when you get to the local levels, a lot of the times it's a lot of Democrats that are running things. And yeah, it's just sad. It's just really sad to see. And this is what it took for somebody like Chris, who, again, family was communist, to kind of wake up and say, okay, enough's enough. Something has to be going on. And it was so good to see, not so good, but so good to see some white guys, Youngstown, because, like Chris said, they're supposed to be the oppressor, and it's a game, and you'll see more when I start talking about Saul Alinsky, but it's such a dirty game that they play, because when you say white guys are evil and white people are this or that, it's like you're talking about the politician who's at like the top of the top in terms of positions, and then you're also talking about the guy that hasn't been able to get a job for 6 months. It's like, what are you really talking about? I don't know. I just always think of that because I grew up with so many poor white people, so many. Like, we were all stealing clothes. So we had clothes to wear. You know what I mean? Jordan Peterson and this gentleman sit down. He talks a little bit more about his whole awakening. Let's get into it.
It does nothing for the people who you are attempting to hypothetically help except make their lives a hell of a lot more miserable. But, you get to feel good about it. So that's a small price to pay, all things considered. All right. So that all broke for you when you were working for NPR.
Yeah.
You started to see. So now, did you actually start moving in more, say, classic liberal or conservative circles at that point? I mean, you must kind of been at a loss for a while, given that your worldview had come under assault under the brutal lessons of reality.
Yeah, exactly. And these are documentaries for PBS, and I was kind of moving to the center, moving to the right. I went through kind of a libertarian phase, even to my own embarrassment now. And my politics shifted, and I could just feel it,
that my relationships with colleagues were starting to fray. People were whispering, I think Rufus may be a conservative now, very concerned about me. And then there was a kind of moment where I had to make a decision. Am I going to engage in politics? Am I going to say what I think is true? Am I going to face the consequences? And, ultimately I said, look, I was kind of turning 30 and I said, it's either now or never. I'm going to kind of come out. I'm going to stake my claim. I burned all of my relationships in the documentary world. I lost funders. I had people who had worked for me as contractors for years tell me that they couldn't work with me anymore. And so the documentary world was just a total dead end. I mean,
that was when? What year was that?
Oh, this was probably like 2015, 2016 when it started to change. So right at as the kind of the Trump years.
Nobody can shun like a what would you call it? A burned leftist. I mean, look, I've tried to maintain a relatively balanced view of the excesses on both sides of the political spectrum. But one thing I have clearly experienced repeatedly is that the left will shun and exclude to a degree that's almost unknown on the right. I've never had anyone on the right that I've talked to refuse to talk to a hypothetical guest, for example. And I've had people on the left, they just do that all the time. And
100%. I got another clip of them talking, but what Jordan Peterson just said is so true. So true. You've never seen it. If you've, I watch a lot of content. You'll watch content sometimes where some guy is trying to talk to people. He's trying to get their perspective on something. And let's just say he's a Christian guy and he's at an LGBTQ rally, he'll be trying to talk to people and someone will come up with an umbrella and start trying to hit him with an umbrella. Another person might even have a megaphone. And then somebody else will come to the person who's about to have civil discourse and go, he's actually really problematic. You probably shouldn't do that. And then the person just go they just go, okay, never mind. Okay, I do not consent, and they'll just walk away. I've seen that happen time and time again. Time and time again. And it's because usually their values, their virtue signaling doesn't come equipped with arguments and information. It just comes with the feeling. I'm doing this or supporting this because I'm a good person. I don't want to be a bad person. But that's not a proper argument when you come to somebody who's like equipped with a bunch of points. You can't say that. You can't be talking to Steven Crowder at a college and be like, I just want to be a good person. He's just going to be like, and that's it. You don't know what to do with yourself. And you see, or Charlie Kirk or whoever or Candace Owens. You can't just have that. And that's usually what it is. It's usually just steeped in emotion all the time. So never works out. Here is a clip where they go a little deeper into what happened with Chris, how he awakened. Let's get into it.
Now we've got some reasons for exclusion laid down. So now, okay, so you announce yourself, you come out of the closet, so to speak, as a more conservative thinker, 2016 and 2017. That pretty much devastates your social community, and I presume your livelihood, at least as an NPR documentarist. Yeah. That's for sure. And so then what happens?
Well, then I kind of had to scramble, right? And it's difficult. I have a family. I'm starting to have kids, and I'm kind of at this career crossroads where I've kind of burned all of the bridges, of the past, and then. I said, all right, well, what can I do? What am I good at? What would actually excite me? What would be kind of something that I would want to pursue? And I fell into more conservative circles. I started reaching out to folks, and then, they were really welcoming me with open arms. They said, oh, you're a kind of, a defector from the other side. And in the conservative world, this is a long tradition. One of my own intellectual heroes, James Burnham, was a National Review writer, professor of philosophy, kind of Cold War, one of the Cold War's most trenchant conservative critics, worked with Richard Nixon, worked with McCarthy, and he was formerly Trotsky's personal secretary in the United States. And so we have this long tradition of defectors from the left moving rightward, and so I was welcomed with open arms. And I was provided some really great opportunities. They said, hey, you know how to do reporting, you know how to get on the ground. Why don't you do some research into the homelessness crisis in West Coast cities? I got connected with some of the magazines and publications. And then I just my whole world opened up. I felt like I had the freedom to think for the first time as an adult. I felt like I didn't have to watch what I was saying.
Isn't it so? Well, I've experienced the same thing, man, because I spent a lot of time working with Democrat backroom personnel over the last 6 or 7 years and hoping to entice, persuade the reasonable Democrats to draw a line between them and the radicals, especially on the DEI front, and also to mostly that, to draw a line, and with very little success. But one of the things that constantly bothered me, because I was also talking to classic liberals and people more on the right at that time, was that whenever I was talking to even relatively moderate people on the left, I had to watch what I was saying all the time.
Yeah.
And it's good to pay attention to what you say and to be careful, but I get damn sick, damn quick of walking on eggshells when I've got something to say, especially among hypothetical peers that are hypothetically working to solve a problem. It's like, I just want to say what I think. And if you find that, if that's going to disrupt our personal relationship, it's like, maybe I don't want to be around you because it's just too damn annoying. And one of the things I have found, it's been a very big surprise to me that I've ended up as a conservative spokesperson. I am not a conservative person. Like, I'm very high in trade openness. And although I've learned to be a traditionalist, that was hard-won knowledge. I partly learned that because I learned that most social science interventions go dreadfully wrong. I really learned about the iron law of unintended consequences.
Yes.
But one of the things that has happened is that I found it way easier to talk to even fundamentalist, conservative Christian traditionalists than radicals on the left. There's no comparison. And that's a very strange thing. It's not what I expected at all.
And I think that is really where we've seen the flip. I mean, for all of the excesses and problems, I'm, a critic of kind of 1960s, but, they were authentic, they were committed, they had kind of open expression, they were trying to push boundaries. And you kind of flip this on its head. Once the left took institutional control, it is the most restrictive, the most limited, the most restrained, the most punishing orthodoxy. And then you get this point to the point where you have now hundreds of thousands of kind of DEI agents, left-wing bureaucrats, enforcers of the orthodoxy. And they just repeat the same 10 points. I've done reporting for now a few years on critical race theory, gender ideology. They inherit a kind of 10 ideas, they dumb them down, they pass them through a bureaucratic, euphemistic filter. And they're like decentralized propaganda agents from Soviet times. It's like, this is the party line. We must say this. You cannot say anything that would contradict the great party line. And it's like, once I ejected from that world, once I opened up this new terrain, and actually, frankly, once I moved out of a big urban center in Seattle and moved out to a smaller town, it's like, this is where a kind of actual free thinking, the feeling of freedom, the feeling of intellectual possibility. And I think one of the reasons that my work has been successful is because I've been kind of liberated from that stifling orthodoxy, that cultural milieu, that institutional pattern. And then, I see all of these folks attacking me. You can't say this, you can't do this, you have to observe this. The Atlantic wrote a piece recently that said, a qualified endorsement of Christopher Rufo, but it was 90% qualifications and 10% endorsement. Because these folks on the center left, they know they agree with me, but they can't behave as I behave. And really that's because I'm much more free than they are. And I love that feeling. I love that spirit. I love fighting these fights with a sense of doing things that others cannot even contemplate doing because they risk their academic sinecures or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's
Man, I like this guy. I like this guy a lot. But yeah, this is basically what awakened him. We're going to move on to his work, what he's done with Ron DeSantis. Then we're going to move on to Saul Alinsky and Rules for Radicals and all of that stuff. Because at its heart, what really moved Chris away from the left, or the tactics that I'm going to be explaining to you. Because when you really break them down, when you really see them at work, they're pretty vile, I would say. Anything that can keep the inner city in the condition that it's in is vile. Anything that can keep people down the way that, anything that can hijack movements like BLM and the trans movement and LGBTQ, because that's what really happens. They infiltrate and they hijack these movements and they use it for power. I mean, so many times I've heard Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, and so many other people say, what's the plus? What's the plus mean? And everybody laughs. But the plus is for whoever is on board. We're trying to amass as many minorities and marginalized people as possible. So the plus is for whoever. Come on, come aboard. The more the merrier. The more power. That's really what's at the heart of it. Let's move on, though. Some of the work that he has done. Do I have a third clip here? No, we don't have a third clip. All right. Some of the work that he has done with DeSantis. Very interesting stuff. Let's go.
Florida is where woke goes to die. In Florida, Governor DeSantis appointed Rufo trustee of a state-funded college. Now Rufo is no longer just a journalist. He has authority, although DeSantis still seems not to know his name.
Christopher Russo from the Manhattan Institute.
Rufo quickly made big changes.
We fired the director of DEI and abolished her entire department.
That upset activists at the school. The Washington Post covered them protesting Rufo's appointment.
The vast majority of you, 95% roughly, agree with me that there are significant problems here. No.
You're the problem. You are the problem.
You are the problem.
No, I'm not the problem. I'm actually the solution.
At one point, the University of Provost tried to stop Rufo from speaking, saying there'd been an anonymous threat.
We cannot put our community at risk.
This is a new technique for your opponents to stop you from speaking, to raise the issue of danger and then say it's too dangerous, we can't allow you to speak.
That's right. Someone sent in a death threat.
Anybody who enters this event at this point is at risk.
We cannot give veto power to anyone who makes an anonymous threat, because what will happen is that they'll make an anonymous threat before anything that they don't like.
Rufo insisted the meeting go forward.
We're the board members. We voted. We have 2-1. We're not going to let you shut this down.
The provost later resigned. Florida's now banned all public universities from funding DEI programs and from claiming that systemic racism and sexism are inherent in the U.S. Free speech advocates call that flatly unconstitutional.
Man, a lot of people, maybe you don't know what DEI is, but a good example of it, I made a video months ago where I saw this woman and she was doing courses on teaching white people how to be less racist and how to be more guilty of feel more guilty about being white. It was a real course and she was charging real money and she was really getting hired by schools and institutions to come and spread this gospel of how evil white people were to their faces and actually teaching them how to be guilty, teaching them how to forfeit their white privilege in a sense. And that's the type of stuff, the exact term that he said, these feather-bedded jobs. That's exactly what those things are. And it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the white people who choose to engage in it. I mean, God bless them. They're actually people willing to I got to sign up for this course. I'm a problem. It's like, oh man. But it doesn't help them. It definitely doesn't help black people at all. At all. There's no one's life in the inner cities and who's in extreme poverty right now, in the hood, who gets their life changed by somebody's DEI job where they're doing things like this. Nobody. Anti-racism, all of these things that they teach, it helps absolutely nobody. But there's so many jobs that have come up because of that. So many. And I love that expression, feather-bedded, because there's nothing to them. They can make it up as they go. I can make a course right now. I'll be like, oh, I'm a white expert. I've lived around white people my whole life. I even sound like a white person. And I can teach you how to be. This is insane. And if I did that, I'm telling you, I can get a job in an institution where I have no business having a job. And I can actually make some things happen. I could dictate the way some people act. That's what's happening right now with DEI. So to hear that he actually got rid of that from all the colleges is incredible, because it's so unnecessary. So unnecessary. One thing I want to touch on, I'm just going to move on to the next clip here. One thing I want to touch on, we're going into who Saul Alinsky is, but what Jordan Peterson said about trying to have reasonable Democrats draw a line between them and the radicals is so essential. And you're going to hear why as we get into what we're about to get into, because that is at the heart of what Chris said in the Joe Rogan clip, where he said it's a betrayal of the true left values when you see all these things that are going on. It really is. And the quicker these reasonable people, older, classical liberals, even some older people have branded me as that in the comments, the quicker they can put a line and say, we do not support this, we do not support these tactics, what they're doing, nothing, the quicker that happens, the better off everybody's going to be. Because then you can actually point to the real monster in the room. But let's just get into who Saul Alinsky is right now. Very interesting stuff. Let's start here. Oh, I got to pull this clip back a little bit for you guys. Let me pull it back right here. Perfect. Let's go.
Saul Alinsky, who was born in 1902 and died in 1972, he was an American of Jewish parentage. He was born in Chicago and raised in Chicago, and he dedicated his life to Marxist thought, to Marxist writing, and to political agitation, which he didn't call political agitation. You know what he called it? Community organizing. Community organizing. And many of you already know that phrase because you know the most famous of community organizers, who we'll come to in just a few moments. But Alinsky was a great admirer of not only Marx, who was like himself merely a theorist, but he was an admirer of Vladimir Lenin, who was a practitioner of Marxist thought. Lenin's tactics for societal disruption have been implemented in one form or another by communists and fascists alike. In fact, Adolf Hitler used Lenin's tactics with his brown shirts. The brown shirts are like BLM or Antifa. That the role that they were to play was societal disruption at the level of physical intimidation, of blocking roads, of throwing Molotov cocktails through business windows. This is what they were about, to intimidate you into either signing up and joining their ranks, or at the very least acquiescing and just quietly going along. And you see, Alinsky learned from both the tactics of Lenin and the tactics of Hitler. Now, again, these are Marxist tactics, but they can be used by fascists, they can be used by communists. But the point is, the tactics themselves can be used by anybody. And Alinsky was studying these tactics for the purpose of the seizure of power. So what's happening in our streets today are Marxist tactics that have, they'd have no absolute beginning. They didn't begin with Saul Alinsky. They didn't begin with Hitler. They didn't begin with Lenin. They didn't begin with Marx himself. Actually, the Jacobins and further back were using these kind of tactics. But you might say that Saul Alinsky is the guy who organized all of this into a coherent little book, or I should say coherent books that are just simple little handbooks for people to use. So he's written two that have become holy writ for the left. The first is called Reveille for Radicals. It was published in 1946. It's not nearly as famous as the second, but it is a book that has garnered a lot of attention in recent years. And then the much more famous Rules for Radicals that was published in 1971, just before his death. Both books are...
So that's what we're going to be touching on. Rules for Radicals. It's funny because if you go look into the mainstream narrative of who Saul Alinsky is, you'll hear that he helped many people in the inner city. He was just a community organizer. You'll hear this legacy that sounds very, very nice. But in reality, to give you a little window, he was Hillary Clinton's mentor. Now, this was more from his teachings. She was very into everything that he taught, his books. They may have met a few times, but he was a mentor in that respect. Also, Newt Gingrich was calling out Obama when when they were both running for president. He was calling out Obama as somebody who was deeply entrenched in the teachings of Saul Alinsky. He was talking about how Obama's going to bring about types of socialism. He's going to bring about everything that Saul Alinsky talks about, the rules for radicals, everything. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, he actually, like, how did he know? How did he know? And like nobody else saw it. I mean, I was under the spell. I'll be honest with you. I was under the whole spell. I was like, yes, we can. Yes, we can. His skin's like mine. I was enamored. But let's go into Rule 13. And listen when you hear these rules. I'm just going to show you 3 of them. Just so you know also, that gentleman that I just played, his name is Hilary Alex Totten. That video that I'm playing is called American Chaos. Who's behind it? That is a great video. It's a long video. It's a great video. This guy seems to have a great channel. If you go to that video, say, hey, Coach Colin, you should do an interview with Coach Colin, because I'm going to be reaching out to this guy. I want him on my channel, definitely. Let's start with Rule 13, though. When you hear this rule, I'm jumping straight to 13, then we're going to 4, then we're going to 6. But when you hear this rule, 13, who do you think they've done this to in the past few years? Let's go. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it.
That is their favorite. And so if they cave, you can tell them what you want. Rule number 13, and this is the favorite of the left. We see it in every campaign. We see it on MSNBC regularly. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. They pick their targets on the right, and they try to make these people radioactive, hurling the epithet racist at anybody and everybody they want to make these people untouchable. That is their favorite.
So that one tactic stood out so much to me, because we've all seen that. We've seen that happen to Trump so much. I don't know if there's anybody I've seen it happen to more than Trump. They took him, they froze him, because when you hear about the talking points, when you talk to somebody who just watches mainstream media, when you hear the talking points, it's old talking points. Joe Rogan's even brought it up. He's like, there's still some people who will talk about Russian collusion. It's because they take a target, they freeze it, they personalize it. That's why in the mainstream media, why do you think they never go back on Russian collusion? Why do you think they never go, sorry guys, we thought it was real, we thought we had real information and something just happened? Why do you think they never do that? Because they're like, no, we said it. It's out there. We know it's in people's minds now. We just want to keep it there. It's not about bringing them the information. It's about putting this person in a certain light. That's why right now, most people are like, Trump's a criminal. What do you mean he's a criminal? He didn't do anything. Well, yeah, he did. Because he's going to court. That's why the court cases are really there. Because it makes him look like a criminal. Even if he's not. What do you mean he's not? Doesn't he have a court date coming up? Isn't he in court? Didn't I just see him in court? That's a criminal. It's just, they just put it out there. Even if every case falls through and he gets convicted of nothing and does no time in jail, because he's like looking at time in jail possibly, they'll still be like, still a criminal. No matter what, it'll just be like that. That's that tactic. That is straight from Saul Alinsky's book. Again, the book is called Rules for Radicals. There's a lot of people that know about this book. And there is no one on the left that isn't entrenched in this ideology. Now we're moving on to Rule 4. This gentleman again, let's get into it.
The Bolsheviks would bring suffering and death on a scale that would beggar the imagination, so that people would be begging to return to Tsarist rule. But you cloak your cause behind a slogan that gives your cause mass appeal. Black Lives Matter. Who could be against that? I think that Black Lives Matter. It's not what it's about. It's never been about Black lives. It's about hijacking a people group and hijacking moral sentiment for a wicked cause. And this is what led Ludwig von Mises to refer to useful idiots, or rather he called them useful innocents. We have since given it a more cynical definition, useful idiots. But those people, the young people who are out in the street, who are carrying the signs for trans rights and all this kind of stuff, they're just useful innocence, according to Ludwig von Mises. They're individuals that you're using for your purpose of seizing power. They're just cannon fodder. That's all they are. Political trash talk. Rule number 5.
Now, that one right there, I even touched on that. I didn't even realize. I touched on this one, hijacking movements. It's funny because Klaus Schwab actually said something. I'm going to move on to the next rule in a second. The next rule is disinformation. Klaus Schwab actually said this exact thing. I have a video. It's called like the 5 pillars, something like that with Klaus Schwab. I gotta re-upload it or something. But Klaus Schwab talks about how these civil organizations like BLM, like all of those things, he's like, those are useful because that tells people what to be upset about, and it tells people what deserves their attention, like what they should be focused on. And that's exactly what BLM did, and that's exactly what LGBT is doing right now. That's exactly what the trans movement's doing. It's hijacking a movement full of real people, because those are real people with real problems. Black Lives Matter, real people, real problems. LGBTQ, real people, real problems. The trans movement right now, those are real people with real issues that really do need tending to. But they've been hijacked. That's why it seems like they want more power than they want solutions. You ever notice that? It's like they just want more and more and more and more. And you're like, I don't understand. I thought we were supposed to be even. Isn't that how it's supposed to be? Isn't that what all of this started with? White people were at a certain level and everybody wanted to be even. But now slowly you're starting to see everybody getting real above white people. Maybe not salary wise or anything like that, but in the whole zeitgeist of society right now, it's like white women are Karens and white men, they're just to be looked down upon. They're racist, they're sexist, they're dangerous, violent, all this stuff. What's going on? Well, it's some people had power, and now there's another sect of people who are disguised in all these movements trying to rip the power away. And it's making it seem like it's going to benefit the person of color and the person who's trans and the person who's gay. But it's not going to benefit any of those people. Not in reality. Just people at the top. Let's move on to the next one. Disinformation.
William Shirer's great classic, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Shire makes this observation. He was in Germany during Hitler's rise to power. So, he was an eyewitness of it. And this is something that he said, I myself was to experience how easily one is taken in by lying and censored press and radio in a totalitarian state. Though unlike most Germans, I had daily access to foreign newspapers, especially those of London, Paris, and Zurich, which arrived the day after publication. And though I listened regularly to the BBC and other foreign broadcasts, my job necessitated the spending of many hours a day in combing the German press, checking the German radio, conferring with Nazi officials, and going to party meetings. It was surprising and sometimes consternating to find that notwithstanding the opportunities I had to learn the facts, and despite one's inherent distrust of what one learned from Nazi sources, a steady diet over the years of falsifications and distortions made a certain impression on one's mind and often misled it. No one who has not lived for years in a totalitarian land can possibly conceive how difficult it is to escape the dread consequences of a regime's calculated and incessant propaganda. He says, I was aware that the stuff they were saying was overwhelmingly false, and yet it still affected the way I thought. How many people who voted for Trump almost are apologetic about it? That's the result of a steady media campaign that has portrayed him as a fascist, so that people want to. And my point here isn't, by the way, who you should or shouldn't vote for. My point is a steady diet of falsifications has an effect. It has an effect, so that many people now are apologetic for being a Christian. Many people are apologetic for just being white. Think of that. You think you're not being affected by the media that isn't influencing you? I promise you, it is influencing you in a big way.
Very interesting. And actually, the next clips that I'm going to show you are going to kind of exemplify that exact thing. A steady diet. That's what it really is. You ever wonder to yourself, you're like, X is pumping away content. You go on X, it's just a stream of just news, everything that's happening, right? You hop on YouTube, same thing is happening, so many different voices. And then you go, who's watching TV anymore? Who's doing that? And then all of a sudden you hear X, talking head just renewed a contract for $15 million. And you're like, what is that? Another one, Anderson Cooper gets $10 million. And you're like, why? Who watches that stuff? It's because they're the steady diet. They're necessary in society. They're necessary to the people trying to manipulate society. They need somebody to be pumping out the steady diet of information that may be false. It might be. But as long as we don't correct ourselves, going right back to what I said with Russian collusion and everything like that, as long as we don't correct ourselves and we just keep pushing the information, it's still going to get into people's minds. That's all we're here to do. We're just here to get it into people's minds. When Whoopi Goldberg says, you know what Biden could do? He could arrest all the Republicans. And that's what Trump's suggesting. So you know what that means? Trump's going to send in the brown shirts and blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's not true. Joe Scarborough's like, Trump is going to kill people. It's obviously false, but they just need it to get into your mind. That's it. They just need you to hear it. They need you to hear it. Maybe you're somebody who's awake enough where that's not going to penetrate you. You're going to laugh when you see something like that. But there's other people who will see stuff like that and they'll go, oh, really? Oh, I don't want that. I hope he doesn't. Now, I want to go through some clips here. This woman here, what is her name? Karine Jean-Pierre, the lady who never answers a question. But here's a perfect example. Here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Let me go back to the proper seconds of things that are just obviously not true, but they just act like they are.
Cards.
I'm asking why.
The president who has had probably one of the most successful first 3 years of an administration than any modern day president. He's done more in the first 3 years than most presidents who had 2 terms. You're asking me about note cards? I don't think that's. I don't. Wait, I'm not speaking to you right now, James. I'm talking to your friend over here, Ed. So thank you so much. But thank you so much for interjecting. Go ahead, Ed.
I was just asking why he relies so heavily on note cards.
I think what's important here and what the American people care about is how this president is delivering for them, and that's what he's doing, and that's what's the most important thing here. All right, I'm going to.
That's what he's doing, and that's the most important thing. The most important thing is how he's delivering for the American people, and that's what he's doing, and that's the most important thing here. She doesn't even bother to make sense because she doesn't have to. It's like, as long as I get this out, as long as you say the thing and I can overspeak you and I can say it and get it out to the masses, my job's done. That's it. That's it. Nobody, what do you think, a bunch of people sit around and analyze clips like I do? Most people aren't doing that. Like, what? I sat and watched this clip like 5 times. Most people aren't doing that. They're going to hear it once. They're going to be like, he's done more than any other president. Case closed. What else do I need to see? Like, I'm out of here. Next video. Let's go. Here's another example of just this 1984 Orwellian type of stuff. Biden, the best communicator. Let's go.
The president is the best communicator that we have in the White House.
The best way to get something done, if it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway, from Charlotte, another line going from in Florida down to Tampa. Of Putin's kleptocracy, yeah. America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to put him, the idea that Los Angeles and what am I doing here? For 2 reasons. One,
it's obviously false. He's the best communicator. It's obviously a false statement. But as long as she says it and she keeps saying it and you get the steady diet of everything that she's saying, mainstream media is saying, then it just becomes true. It just becomes true. And I know in your mind, you're like, no, my mind doesn't take that in. But there's so many people where they're not. I watch mainstream media. I watch them like this. I go like this. There's some people who watch mainstream media and they're just like this. They're like, okay. And they go like this. That's it. They're just watching. It's just the news. So of course they're just taking it in. Their subconscious. I mean, we don't even have to get into the conversation of how much your subconscious takes in unknowingly, but that's just how it is. Now, getting to the last thing. White rule rage. Okay? White rule rage. These gentlemen wrote a book called White Rule Rage, and this is what they think about white rule people. Again, you're seeing this at work, this rules for radicals, this Saul Alinsky stuff. Please get the book, or at least watch a video that's explaining it in full. Please listen to this.
Joining us now, Professor of Political Science at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Tom Schaller, and journalist and opinion writer Paul Waldman. Their new book, out tomorrow, is entitled White Rural Rage, The Threat to American Democracy. And Tom, I'll start with you. Why are white rural voters a threat to democracy at this point? You would think, as we pointed out, looking at Joe Biden's background and Donald Trump's, that the opposite would be true.
I mean, we lay out the fourfold interconnected threat that white rural voters pose to the country. First of all, and we show 30 polls and national studies to demonstrate this, so we provide the receipts in Chapter 6. They're the most racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, and anti-gay geodemographic group in the country. Second, they're the most conspiracist group. QAnon support and subscribers, election denialism, COVID denialism and scientific skepticism, Obama birtherism. Third, anti-democratic sentiments. They don't believe in an independent press, free speech. They're most likely to say the president should be able to act unilaterally without any checks from Congress or the courts or the bureaucracy. They're also the most strongly white nationalist and white Christian nationalists. And fourth, they are most likely to excuse or justify violence as an acceptable alternative to peaceful public discourse.
So you mentioned a lot of negative factors about this demographic. Tom, what else do they have in common?
Well, you know, I think that what really matters at this point in time.
What makes them vulnerable?
Oh, well, a lot of that has to do with, as a starting point, the problems that rural America has, which are very real and very profound. They have the more problematic education systems. They have poor infrastructure. They've had a lack of economic opportunity. We've seen a lot of manufacturing jobs leave from rural areas. And that kind of left them open to someone like Donald Trump, who would come along and tell them something that was true, that there is a system that has not served them well. And he said...
They're pissed off.
They are pissed off, and they have some reason to be with both parties. The trouble is that what Donald Trump gave them was not something that was actually going to fix those problems, but was just a kind of a way to channel their rage and anger. And, you know, we've been told for so long, especially Democrats have been told, that in order to get rural voters, to get them to listen to you, you have to go there, you have to really empathize with them, you have to show them that you understand their lives, you have to, you know, put on a Carhartt jacket and go down to somebody's farm.
Have a beer.
And maybe milk a cow.
Yes.
And it turned out that none of that was true.
No.
When Donald Trump came along, he didn't do any of that stuff. He was just a conduit for their rage, their anger, their resentment. And that turned out to be what they wanted. And it wasn't really about the material conditions of their lives, because he didn't improve their lives, but he got more support in rural areas in 2020 than he had in 2016, despite the fact that none of their problems had gotten any better under him. All that he gave them was a way to essentially give a big middle finger to Democrats, to people who live in cities, and to the rest of the country.
Isn't he more...
See, I find that very interesting. First of all, just wow. Like they're not even white. You know what I mean? Like, it's so crazy. Man, but, you know, I find it interesting. He says at the end that, you know, they didn't change anybody's lives. But then when you look at the black support that has ramped up with Donald Trump, their main thing that they say is that he improved our lives. Here's another thing. Most of these black people are from the inner city. So that means their families and their friends and people around them, probably even their local government, all Democrat. Why would they be looking to give a middle finger to their own community and family by voting for Trump, or by saying that they're going to vote for Trump in the next election? Doesn't really make any sense. But again, it doesn't have to. They just have to get the message out that white rule people are the problem and the only reason that they like Trump. Not because of his policies, not because of how he has treated them, not how he has improved their lives, because he hasn't, as he said. He hasn't improved their lives. It's not policy. It's nothing but rage. It's the only reason. And if you are somebody who wants to vote for Trump, well then you're just using him as a conduit for rage. That's it. That's it. And also, if you're white, you're the most racist. If you're white from a rural area, you're the most racist, xenophobic, blah, 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 blah. I'm telling you, man, go look at Saul Alinsky's work. You'll see it at work in the Democratic Party, in leftist parties around the world. You will see it at work over time. It's wild. But anyways, guys, I just wanted to show you all of that stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And other than that, I'm out.